Hello, my name is Diane Burns and I'm the Program Manager for the Spina Bifida Coalition of Cincinnati. Jeremy Moses joins me here in the office as co-facilitator and technical consultant.
Hello everyone.
We are presenting our 6th webinar in the Create Your Future series, Maximizing Your School Experience. This presentation is packed with valuable information for your school-aged child, so you might want to keep a notepad handy. I would now like to introduce our presenters, Terry Dorr and Pam Wendell. Terry is the parent mentor at Lakota Schools and the parent of a child with a disability. She provides one-to-one support attending IEP meetings with parents, training them on their legal rights, acting as a liaison between parents and school district personnel, and connecting parents to other families with specific disabilities. Pam has firsthand knowledge of successful IEP planning as a parent of a precocious yet complex 16-year-old with spina bifida, Amelia the Great. Pam has particular insight into the process since she taught high school English in her prior career. Welcome, Terry and Pam.
Thanks, Diane. We're excited to be here tonight and to be talking about how to maximize your school experience, specifically geared toward the spina bifida community, but of course many of these things can be generalized to people with other disabilities as well. I have had the very great honor of working with Terry for several years now in the Lakota School District where Amelia attends. She's a parent mentor, and we started out working when Amelia was really young and I knew nothing, and with Terry's help now I know a little bit. So she's a great asset for us, and we're so glad to have her here today. So please welcome Terry.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet, Pam. I'm excited to be here and a little nervous to be doing my first webcam, so hopefully this is going to go off really smoothly and we might have a little fun too. Everything that we talk about here is going to be based out of the state of Ohio. There may be several of you listening from other states. When we talk about resources and we talk about specifics with the law and those sorts of things, I just want to make sure that you know that we're focusing on the state of Ohio for the purposes of this presentation. So let's get started. We're going to talk about special education. What is special education? Well, special education provides specially designed instruction that meets a student's needs. It is no cost to you as a parent, and the services must take place as much as possible with typical peers in the general education classroom. Now, a team has to decide if that's not appropriate, and we'll get into that as we go on. The IEP is there to help the student make meaningful progress. So first I want to talk about what is an IEP. It is an individualized education program, and that students have to qualify for. So there's an ETR and some evaluation that has to take place. It's not an automatic thing. We'll get into that a little bit. And an IEP is a legal document. So you are signing when you agree to services to provide these specially designed instruction for your student with this legal document. Okay? Jeremy?
We are going to watch the first poll right now. If you would, please select the appropriate response and click submit. We'll give you about 30 seconds.
All right, here we go. So we're asking, have you had any experiences with an IEP prior to today? So no, yes, some, or yes, many, so that we can have an idea of the audience.
Well, we are already at 100%, so the majority says yes, many experiences.
I am not surprised by that answer. So we're going to talk about the fact that special education is not a place. The label of service, which Pam's going to get into here in just a minute, does not drive the location of services. The needs do. So if your child happens to have multiple disabilities, that does not mean that they are going to be educated in a multiple disabilities classroom. Those are team decisions that have to be made. What it does mean is that your child can receive that specially designed instruction in a location to meet his or her particular needs. And when we talk about the least restrictive environment, that should be in the classroom with typical peers as much as possible. That also means lunchroom with the typical peers. That means gym with your typical peers. The least restrictive environment means like any other student in that building. It also can provide related services such as speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and transportation if needed. And again, that interaction with same-age peers. A diagnosis from a medical professional does not automatically mean that you get an IEP or a 504. We're going to touch on 504s here for just a brief moment as well. So a doctor gives you a diagnosis. Now what? What happens then? There is no magic test that gets you an IEP. It is a team process. To start that process, you need to contact the school in writing and ask for a meeting to address your concerns. An IEP does not automatically guarantee that specially designed instruction, and sometimes a 504 is more appropriate for the student. 504 is actually a broader interpretation of the law, and a 504 can provide accommodations for the student, where the IEP, again, is for that specially designed instruction. If a child does not qualify for an IEP, that doesn't mean that a 504 is an automatic door prize. A team still has to meet and determine that that would be the appropriate services. So we're going to talk about what is the difference between an IEP and a 504. Again, it's that specially designed instruction piece that provides access and helps to make progress in the general education curriculum. A 504 plan removes the barriers and provides for those accommodations to help them access the general ed curriculum. Again, the 504 is a broader definition of disability, which Pam's going to talk about right now.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. So Ohio has 13 categories of disability that a student can qualify under. So in order to get that IEP, you have to qualify for one of these 13. We're not saying you have to have all 13. And really the ones that are most common for students with spina bifida would start with number 5, other health impaired. Also number 7, traumatic brain injury, or number 11, orthopedic impairment. You have to qualify under at least one of these. You don't get extra credit if you qualify for more than one. So what I typically did was I would have them choose the one that most accurately defined my daughter's needs that year. So in this case, she qualifies under traumatic brain injury, but that certainly is not the case for everybody.
Right. And when she did qualify, I just want to make a point. The first step is that you have to have one of these categories of disability, and then the second step is that you have to show that you have to prove that it shows adverse effect on their learning in order to qualify for an IEP.
Exactly. So the orthopedic impairment, then that one sometimes you have to be a little creative and show the educational need for the IEP. So now we're looking at least restrictive environment. That's a big word. You want to make sure you know what it is when you go into any of these meetings. IDEA says that students with disabilities should have the opportunity to be educated with non-disabled peers to the greatest extent appropriate. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Each school team, and I would even add family, may have a different approach to this or different perspective on it. And the key, I really believe, is what is best for your child. So what you feel is the least restrictive environment for your child might be different from what someone else who is the parent of a child with the same diagnosis believes is the LRE. It's also okay for this to change as they get older. A personal note here, I began Amelia's school career as a staunch advocate for her being totally immersed in the typical classroom. And as she got older and her needs changed a little bit, and her education needs changed a little bit, and her life goals changed a little bit, so did the least restrictive environment. So for her, being in a somewhat separate environment part of the time really was a benefit for her. So that was a process as a parent that I needed to go through to kind of come to terms with that. So not arguing for 100% inclusion 100% of the time doesn't mean you're not doing your job as a parent.
Very good point. Thanks for pointing that out, Pam. So let's say your child does qualify for special education and you have an IEP in place. I just want to make sure that you know that districts cannot tell you that there's a waiting list. There's no waiting list for special education or transportation or related services or preschool. Districts can get creative and offer itinerant services or other things for preschool, but I want to make sure that parents know there is no wait list.
Terry, what is an itinerant service?
Itinerant services can be provided in a different location, and they could be for a smaller amount of time depending on what the student's needs are.
All right, thanks.
And again, the team has to decide what that looks like. Thank you. Good question. So we're going to talk about what are your rights as a parent and what is your role in the process. So Pam talked about this a little bit. The law, which is IDEA, gives you the right to participate in your child's education. You are an important member, if not the most important member of the team throughout this process, from determining what evaluation information is needed and collected, including outside. So if you get medical information, you have the right to share that with the team as necessary or not. You get to control what that is. You are a contributing member for the evaluation, and you help get to determine the eligibility under those 13 categories that Pam just talked about. And you also get to talk about the goals and services for your child. You know your child better than anyone else. You know what their strengths are, you know what their weaknesses are that need to be addressed, and you have the most valuable information to share with the team. I cannot stress that enough. As parents, we have to take on this role and we have to take it on seriously.
So let me jump in here, Terry. Some more of your rights and roles in this process. At any time, you can ask for a break. You can slow the meeting down. You can ask for more clarification. One of my go-to phrases is "help me understand." So help me understand why you feel this goal would be appropriate, or help me understand how you came up with this present level of performance. You can ask questions. You can bring whoever you want. This means you can bring your spouse, you can bring your friend, you can bring an educational advocate. One time I brought one of the school teachers at Children's Hospital with me to an IEP meeting. It was a special circumstance. She had spent a lot of time that year in the hospital working with him, so he really had a good perspective on what educationally she did. And that was a huge support to me. So you can have any of your concerns addressed, get records, data, and you also have the right to decide who's allowed to miss the meeting. So there are rules about who has to come to the meeting, and sometimes what happens is that one of those participants can't stay for the whole hour, or they can't come on that day, and they need to contact you ahead of time, get your permission for them not to come, and for you to set up how they're going to share their information with you. So you have that right. Also, parent involvement, certainly we all know, is not a once-a-year thing. It is so vital that you feel like you are an important member of the team and that this is worth your time. I know that we are often running kids to appointments and wheelchair fittings and brace fittings, and they're sick or they're having a surgery, and so why take one more day off to go to an IEP meeting? And I can't stress enough how helpful those days have been to Amelia and to me in the whole process. So you're really important, so make sure you tell yourself that before you walk in. Bring notes. Take notes, and have somebody with you who's willing to listen. Oftentimes I get wrapped up in the moment and I may remember what someone said differently, from what they really said. So, for example, if my husband is there with me later when we debrief, I can say, oh, can you believe so-and-so said this? And he says, well, no, Pam, actually what they said was. So for me, that's really helpful. Very, very important, I think, is to follow up after the IEP meeting or any IEP team meeting with an email. This does several things. First of all, it gives you a written document. Okay, if it's not written, it didn't happen is one of the phrases. So I send an email to the whole team thanking them for spending their time, because I can tell you as a past teacher, it is a huge time suck. It takes a lot of time from a lot of people on the team. So I want to let them know that I appreciate they took that hour or sometimes hour and a half to talk with me about my child. So I thank them for it, and then I say what I understand we came to a decision about was X. That way I am verifying my own understanding. If they have a different understanding, they can respond, and again, it is a written document, so I have it for later. Parent involvement is also important for the profile section of the IEP. They'll ask you what your child's dreams are, what their abilities are, what your future planning ideas are, and again, these things change. The goals can change, the future planning can change. You know, I think Amelia started off saying she wanted to be a neurosurgeon. Well, at this point, she understands that she wants to have more of a family life than that. So, so her future goals have changed. And stay professional and child focused. I will talk more about this later. It's kind of my soapbox. If you stay focused on your child and what your child needs, and you do it in a professional manner, it's okay to have disagreements. It's not okay to be rude. It's not okay to call names. But if you're being professional and focused on your child, you're not going to get there. You're just going to focus on what your child needs. And that is going to get you the best results from the team, for sure.
Absolutely. Very, very good. Just one more thing about the following up with an email. That's another good way, I always say, to beware of hallway promises. You know, sometimes you'll catch your teacher or your assistant principal or someone in the hallway and you'll have a little discussion and there's no real documentation of it or anything. Following up with an email is another way to make sure that that discussion gets captured.
Absolutely.
Yes, so just another little tip. As Pam said, you know your child. It is a team process. IEPs are a team process, and there are what we call the big four that are required to be at each IEP meeting. So the first person is the district rep. These are not in order of importance. These are just listed for our general knowledge. And the district representative is someone who can delegate the resources of the district. In Lakota, my district, it's typically an assistant principal unless there is someone else that's otherwise designated to sit in on that meeting. A general education teacher is required, you as the parent, your child if appropriate. I always suggest at least having the child there for a small portion of the IEP meeting, and as they get older, expanding that time so that they can start self-advocating and speaking for themselves about the things that are important and the decisions that are being made about them and what they want out of their education. And then the next one would be the special education provider or the intervention specialist. The extras that can be included at the IEP meeting are anyone with knowledge of the student, so that could be your related services, your speech, your occupational therapy, sometimes it's visual services, whatever it may be that your child needs, or it could be an outside provider that's providing some of those supports. Agency support, which is really heightened at transition age, which is 14 or above. And any person who can explain how the evaluation results will affect teaching. That's typically if there's a school psychologist involved or if there was a recent ETR done, and that information needs to be included. Okay, so at an IEP meeting, we're going to talk about any changes or any discussion that has taken place should be captured in a document known as a PRO1, which is a prior written notice. So each time something is about to happen, so before an evaluation, before IEP services begin, before a change of placement, etc., a PRO1 should be given to the families. It documents what was changed or discussed, and it is required at each step in the process. This is parent power. If there's something that's discussed, or there's something that you've asked for, or something that you feel that your child needs and you are told no, it should be documented in a PRO1. That can open the discussion for further discussion to take place and further debate, and if it needs to go to the next step, a PRO1 would be the starting point for that to take place.
And you may have to ask for it specifically. I know that it is required, but it has been my experience that occasionally they are not forthcoming with the PRO1. So if you ask, have I signed a PR01 on this change? That does two things. First of all, it holds them accountable to what they should be doing anyway, and it lets them know that you know your stuff, which is powerful as well.
Right, and it's documentation.
Absolutely.
Moving forward. Okay, so what happens at the IEP team meeting?
It is super exciting.
Yes.
It's not that bad. The first couple I was petrified, and I get better every year. So by the time she graduates, I will be really good at it. So the first tip is that I bring in treats to the IEP meeting, and I know that didn't get a bullet, but because I want to get them in a good mood as we have this meeting, so you might think about that. So in the IEP team meeting, they will discuss your child's strengths and abilities. I think always important to start with strengths, start with a positive, and then go to what your goals are. Your concerns are going to be addressed. You're going to talk about what your child needs in order to learn, what sorts of accommodations, modifications, and we'll get to some specifics on that in just a little bit. What is your child's current level? So present level of performance, you might hear it called PLOP. What are they doing right now in that subject or overall? They'll talk about what can be achieved in 1 year. So the IEP is not meant to turn a 5th grader into a neurosurgeon. It's meant to turn a 5th grader into a 6th grader. So what are the goals that will help us get from one to the next? Obviously goals and objectives, services, who's going to provide them, when, how often, for how long, and of course the all-important signatures of everybody that's involved.
Okay, so an IEP doesn't guarantee a few things. We're going to talk about what it does guarantee in the next slide, but right now we're going to talk about what it doesn't guarantee. Unfortunately, it does not guarantee that your child will get a passing grade or straight A's. They are still going to have to participate in the general curriculum as much as possible with those accommodations and supports, with that specially designed instruction to help them, but they're still going to be expected to participate in that rigorous, fast-paced environment of school that we know and love so much. The next thing is that special education and related services, they do ensure FAPE. Now, what is FAPE? FAPE is the provision under IDEA, which actually supports 2 areas. And usually I test people on this, and since you guys aren't in front of me, I can't test you, so you're getting off free right now. The first point that I want to make about FAPE is that it guarantees employment and independent living skills. Those are the 2 factors of FAPE that the IEP should support moving forward with their education. So FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. Now, the Supreme Court, I believe it was last fall, just had a ruling, and they discussed the fact that appropriate public education also includes meaningful benefit. So moving forward, we have to pay attention as advocates and parents what that means, because the Supreme Court hasn't come out with any more information about that. But they are assuring us that FAPE now provides meaningful benefit for students. And today I just found a quote by the Chief Justice John Roberts, and he made this quote on March 22nd of this year. And his quote was this: "The IEP is not a form document. It is constructed only after careful consideration of the child's present levels of achievement, disability, and potential for growth." So that was a little more information about that meaningful benefit. And the thing that I want to point out about that quote is that the present levels are critical moving forward with the IEP process. You need to have updated and current information on that child, and any time that that information changes, such as a health issue or something happens, you have the right to call that team together and discuss it as a team about what changes should be made to that document for that child moving forward. An IEP also does not guarantee that your child's going to get into college. They may not get into medical. They may not get into the area that they're interested in, but they can get career readiness and all the preparedness that they need to be employed and independent living. Okay, and it doesn't guarantee that they're going to get a job after school either. We're going to talk about a little bit of the transition process as we move forward. Okay, and it also does not guarantee that your child won't be suspended or disciplined. The same rules that apply to any other student at the school apply to students who are getting services with special education and related services. An IEP does guarantee that free and appropriate public education in the typical peers as much as possible in the least restrictive environment. We've talked about this already a little bit, Pam, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
It also guarantees that your child gets that rigorous and challenging educational program that we discussed. It also manifestation determination 10-day rule. So if your child has behaviors that are significant enough that they have been suspended or removed from school for 10 days or more, that automatically guarantees that the team would come together and discuss whether or not the behaviors were a direct result of the disability or not. So that's the manifestation determination rule. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. If you have questions about that, let me know, and I have some resources on that as we move forward. It also guarantees that you get those related services as appropriate: speech, transportation, occupational therapy, vision, etc. And you can amend that document as necessary. So anytime, like I said, if your child's needs change, if their medical needs change, if something great happens, if they meet their goals, you can amend that IEP at any time. One more thing that I didn't add, there's not a bullet for this, but also the other thing that an IEP does guarantee is called stay put rights. So if there is a dispute, the services that are in place stay put until that dispute is resolved.
And one more note about those related services. The as appropriate phrase here is key, especially for our kids. I think about things like PT. Amelia received PT when she was really young because not being able to transition from one room to the next did impede her ability to get that education. As she got older, she lost her PT benefits. She still has mobility challenges. Going up the steps is difficult for her, but it was no longer necessarily impeding her education. So it's all school and education related, those associated services. So here are some sample modifications. I will tell you that most of these have been on one of our IEPs at some point or another, and there are a million more that you could think of, but I tried to come up with some of them that might be most appropriate for a child with spina bifida. Shorten homework to essential learnings only. That is a key phrase. If you throw out essential learnings in your IEP, then your IEP team will know that you know your stuff. That means in history, she doesn't have to know every date and every name and every battle. they pick out what is essential to learn, and that is what she gets. So that is most definitely a modification. Testing only on essential learnings as well, with review sheet given prior to test. You may have to fight for this one. It took me a while, but it truly has been a remarkable change. Certainly lengthen time to turn in assignments. We have up to 100% more time, so if they have generally 1 day, then she's given 2. We also have, I can initial in her planner when the student has completed what I feel is enough homework. This comes with trust. When your IEP team trusts you and knows that you are a collaborative part of the team, they will trust that you know when enough is enough. So those of us who have kids who do bowel routines at night, once I explained how long she spends on that every night and how she can't do 3-4 hours of homework, then they kind of got it. Reduced number of group projects, long-term projects. Those were a hassle with my typical daughters, and they were sort of a nightmare. So I was really happy about that one. No deductions for spelling. A lot of these go back to the nonverbal learning disability, and you can probably get more ideas from your nonverbal evaluation if you've had one of those. I wish I had this one when I was in school, grades based on completion, not correctness. So if she tries the math problem, she gets credit for the math problem. Some sample accommodations, seat at the front of the class away from distracting peers and visual stimulus. This was more important in elementary school. My mother was a kindergarten teacher and she loved her bulletin boards, as most elementary teachers do, and that was very, very distracting for Amelia. So she needed to sit close to a boring bulletin board so that she could focus more. They thought I was strange when I asked for that, but it really did work. Extra set of books at home, leave class early so that they can get through the halls without as much rush. Ability to go to a safe space. You can ask for this. I am here to tell you that you can ask for it. If your child has a headache, if they have anxiety, if they have some sort of medical issue, you can have some place where they go to kind of decompress. You certainly should expect a raised desk to accommodate your wheelchair if you're in one, a footstool to rest your feet on when you're in a typical desk, things like that. Another thing you want to do is you want to look into your district's policy on homebound instruction. Different districts handle it differently, and I found even different schools within the same district approach it a little bit differently. So be an informed consumer and ask those questions before you ever think you're going to need them. In our case, because unfortunately it happens quite often, they now have written it into the IEP that homebound instruction for Amelia begins after 2 days missed, which is less than our district's minimum. And it is very detailed. 1 day equals 1 hour, which is the typical. And I don't have to call and beg because it's already in the IEP. Access to a private bathroom so they can cath or take care of any kind of bowel accidents. Recess for elementary school age when heat or cold is a certain problem. That was super helpful.
Those are all great tips and ideas, and I just want to reiterate that those are all team discussions that have to take place. You can come in with those ideas, and you can come in with the things that work for your son or daughter, but again, the team has to determine what those are and then write those specifically into the IEP.
Yeah, and again, when I did these, and I have some more.
You do have some more.
I do. I would come in with my rationale behind them. So I didn't just come in with a whole list of, you have to provide all of these things for my child. I would always approach it as, this is what my child needs to learn, and this is why, and let's have a discussion.
Absolutely.
And eventually, I won on all of these at some point, but not all of them all the time, certainly.
And that's a good point. You know, I always tell families to pick the hill that you're willing to die on. Prioritize them, pick the one that you know that your child needs the most, and then go from there. You don't need to get everything at once. So that's a great
Absolutely.
point, Pam. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and it goes back to the old saying, we're not guaranteed a Cadillac, we're just guaranteed, you know, a car, right? A Chevy. So, and my dad would love that because he was a Chevy dealership manager. There you go. Go Dad. Okay, some other things I'll go through quickly so I don't talk too long. Temperature controlled environment can also be for either the classroom or the transportation home, if that is a real problem for your child. Verbal response evaluation instead of a written test, take-home test with notes. We've tried several different versions of these. Frequent quizzes instead of tests. Use of a calculator at all times. This one I had to fight for, you know, oh yes, they can use the calculator, but only, you know, on these things. So again, it was a conversation with the team.
And some of it, can I just interrupt there? Because some of those are statewide testing initiatives. We don't want to give kids calculators if they're going to be expected to take a test and they can't have access to it. So I just want to
Absolutely, and that's another whole conversation we won't even get into, right?
Exactly.
District-provided technology, again, it's a conversation. You really want to know what the purpose behind your request is. And for us, what that looked like is an evaluation period where they thought about what she might need. They tried some things out. They got some data. It was a process. And notes provided by the teacher or sometimes another student, visual schedule, cues, etc.
Yeah, I think those are really great ideas. So thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.
All right, at this point, we will go ahead and launch our second poll now. Please select the appropriate response and click submit. We'll give you about 30 seconds once again.
Awesome. What's your biggest concern about classrooms? So you probably had all of these concerns at some point or other. So what is your biggest concern, or what is your concern right now?
Looks like 2/3 of you have responded already. That's awesome. And we'll give you another few seconds on that. So we'll go ahead and close it now. It's split 50-50. Aid support got 50% and academic also got 50%.
Okay. All right, other things to know. We're going to talk about transition. I just want to say one thing, and then Pam's going to talk a little bit more. The state of Ohio says transition begins at the age of 14, and Terry Durr says that transition begins when we say transition begins. I think we need to plan way earlier than the age of 14. And I truly believe that when we work on our child's gifts and strengths, that the transition process goes smoother. So I'll get off my soapbox and I'll hand it over to Pam.
Absolutely, my soapbox as well. Maybe I have been inculcated. But we started earlier than 14. Sometimes, even though the state of Ohio says 14, again, sometimes schools are reluctant to do that. And so you just respectfully and collaboratively say, thank you, I appreciate your opinion, and I would like to start talking about transition. So beginning in those transition years, your child is invited to attend more of the IEP meeting. That's when we started having Amelia attend more and more of it, because it is certainly the goal that she becomes independent and can advocate for herself. And so the more practice she gets in that, we feel the better. So I try to keep my mouth shut now as much as possible during IEP meetings, and I know some of you out there are laughing at that because it's a little difficult. Yes, I know. Good thing my husband isn't on today. So in transition, your future planning should be focused either to employment or college, or both, maybe. The state of Ohio says that services can be in place until the 22nd birthday. Terry, why did I just stress the word can?
Section 5 of the IEP is the post-secondary transition services. As part of that, we need to document the courses of study, the transition service and activity, and there has to be a specific goal. As part of that, we need to have some assessment data to show the present level and then to show growth. So for instance, as I was saying about going to the bank, can your child balance a checkbook? Can your child make it to the bank? Can they get transportation arranged to get to and from? If your child needs prescriptions, for example, do they know that they can call the doctor to get that prescription and then to go pick up that prescription and then budget for that prescription and then get back from the store to get that prescription? Those are things that can be included in that transition service section. So as the child reaches the graduation requirements and you're looking at that employability and independent living to become an adult, you need to have some information and data to determine whether or not that child is ready to exit service or if they need some more supports in the community moving forward. So
absolutely, information and data always. So throughout this entire process, and here's my soapbox, I think it is key in our responsibilities as parents to establish a good relationship with the schools. They are not the bad guy. You may think, you know, today or tomorrow or next March that they are, but as a past high school teacher myself, as the child of a lifetime teacher, I'll tell you that people go into education for the right reasons. Nobody's getting rich, and it is really a lot of work. So the more you can collaborate with the school, with your team, with the folks in your district, the better off everybody is going to be. So listen, and listen with the intent to hear. Okay, don't just listen to hear what you want to hear. And that is something that I still work on. Empathize with them. So if they say, this is why we're not sure we can provide you what you just asked for, try to put yourself in their shoes and come to some agreeable solution that maybe meets both of your needs, which is understanding their point of view, being flexible, and be proactive. So at the beginning of each year when Amelia was younger, I would set up a meeting with her elementary teacher and her special ed teacher, and I would go in and I would have an hour where I just sat down and talked to them before the school year even got started. Here's what she's really great at. Here's where she's going to need some more help. Here's how to get a hold of me because I want to be an active part in this relationship. And again, I would bring food. As she has gotten older in high school, it's hard to get 7 teachers all in a room at the same time. And instead of having 30 students, they now have 230 students. So I have been forced to change my ways a little bit. I now send an email with a whole description of those sorts of things to them. I don't think it's as effective, certainly, but it does a couple of things. Again, it shows them that I want to be an active, collaborative part of the process. It lets them know how to reach me. It lets them know that I know there will be challenges and I appreciate the extra effort that it may take this year to have her in their class. Sometimes I get great response from teachers, and sometimes teachers don't read them. But again, it's a document, and I can say a month later, hey, remember when I sent you that email and I mentioned that if she doesn't turn in an assignment, you probably should cue her? And then they go, oh.
Right. And one thing that I just want to say about that too is that if there's a problem with the teacher, I like the fact that you're addressing the teacher and that you're not going over their head to somebody else, that you're following the chain of command and you're really trying to problem solve
Absolutely.
with the people that you're having the beef with and not taking it to the next level. So
Absolutely.
I think that's...
And if you have to take it to the next level, you have to take it to the next level, and that happens sometimes. But I know I wouldn't want someone to go and complain to my boss before they came to me with the problem. So I try to do the same thing for them. So again, more on that theme: interpersonal skills, communication, build trust with the team, keep communication positive, child-focused, assume the best, use appropriate language, don't threaten, and certainly you catch more flies with sugar than vinegar, which is why Bud makes the brownies before IEP day. So I'm type A, so I always have things written down. I have to-do notes everywhere. You should see me right now. I have several notebooks open. And it's going to help you when you go into the IEP, because no matter how prepared you are, you're going to get a little nervous. Even Terry got a little nervous before we started this webinar, even though I probably wasn't supposed to admit that. So make a list, be organized, stay focused on what matters, and again, what Terry said earlier, pick the hill you're willing to die on, okay? 1 year for me, it was one thing. The next year, it was something different, and if I got that, then I was willing to let the other things slip. And of course, that IEP can be amended when? Anytime you want.
Right. I wouldn't recommend doing it 364 times a year, but you can if you want to.
All right, at this time, we're going to launch our third and final poll of the evening. Please select the appropriate response and click submit. We'll give you about 30 seconds to do that.
There we go. Okay, you probably had several of these, but pick one.
I'm sure my mom was very exhausted even thinking about going into IEP days when I was a child. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it, and it's evenly distributed across all of them.
You guys are keeping it interesting out there. That's awesome. All right, hitting a dead end. What do you do when things don't go well with your school team? What can you do? Pam?
Call 1-800-TERRY.
Well, you can try that. I don't know if it would work, but I would definitely suggest calling the team back together to discuss those concerns. If you need to, there are 2 things through the Ohio Department of Education. You can ask for IEP facilitation. You can ask for mediation. You can also file a complaint. I would recommend trying the other 2 first, but if that's what you want to do, you have that right to do it. And then a due process hearing is also, don't jump steps though. I wouldn't recommend jumping steps.
Not. And I think there's power in just using those words. So if you use the word mediation or out of compliance, those are more than one word, then they know you know your stuff.
Yes. And speaking of knowing your stuff, I want to talk about this resource. So on the next page, we have a list of resources, and the first one that you see there is this handy-dandy guide, A Parent's Rights in Special Education, Ohio. So if you're interested in mediation, if you're interested in IEP facilitation, if your district has a parent mentor, on page 12, it should list who that parent mentor is and how you can contact them. This is a new resource for families in the state of Ohio, so if you don't have this in your arsenal, I strongly encourage you to download this on that link right there in your thing, and Parent Power right there. The second thing I would encourage you to do is rightslaw.com. That is where a lot of the current information, especially from the Supreme Court that I talked about earlier, there's information about that. There's information about 504s. There's information about special education, all kinds of resources. And
amazing resources. I bought several books from Wright's Law that I used again and again, and was happy when I handed them over to somebody else.
Yes, they're wonderful resources. Do you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah, sure. Then the next one is from Kennedy Krieger. It's a guide that you can print out for school personnel working with students with spina bifida. I found this recently, and it had some good medical background, some good educational stuff, especially if you're going in and your teacher hasn't had a student with spina bifida before. You might present this so that they can read it in all their free time. The last two books are books, again, that have definitely helped me out quite a bit. And these really speak to the nonverbal learning disabilities, which whether you have that official diagnosis or not, I think it's important. The first one saved me, nonverbal learning disabilities at school. There's also another version at home, helps give you real life tips on what you might see, how it is associated with nonverbal learning disability, and where to go from there. I bought one of these books for my child's elementary school when she was little and gave it to them. The second one, Smart but Scattered, looking at those executive function skills. There's also now Smart but Scattered Teens. Peg Dawson and Richard are really great, and again, put things into perspective where everybody can understand it. So highly recommend those two books. Buy them, see if someone has them, see if your library has them, whatever you feel like doing. Okay. Here we go. Here's how to contact us.
And I can talk with anybody over the phone if you have questions, if you have concerns. I cannot attend meetings outside of Lakota schools, but I can get you resources and help problem solve. So if that's something that someone's interested in, I'd be happy to help.
That's great, and I'm happy to help. We joke that in the last 16 years, if it's possible to have experienced spina bifida, my daughter has experienced it. So, and I think that's true sometimes in school as well. So happy to just be a parent voice to listen as well.
Thank you for presenting this information and providing practical tips for use in the IEP process. During the presentation, we did have several questions. First question is, where do I find an advocate that has my child's needs at school as a priority? Do I have to pay for this service?
Well, parent mentors are free. So, and there's, like I said, if you have one in your district, it would be probably listed in here on page 12 at the parents' rights. Also, the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities is the state parent training and information center, so you can contact them, and they are free. There are several advocates that you can pay for. I don't know how you would get in touch with them, but I certainly would recommend starting with the Parent Mentor or the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities.
Okay, question number 2. At what age or maturity level is it appropriate to include my student in their IEP training or meeting?
So I'll take this one. I think, again, this is one of those personal choices that as a parent you can make with your child. I believe that it was important for Amelia to be involved at least for a few minutes, even from her very first year, so that they would see her as a person. So she wasn't just this set of numbers and data. She was actually a person. So that's how I started it. And that has fluctuated through the years. If we're talking about difficult situations that I think might either upset her or worry her, then I don't have her there during that part. And certainly since she's turned 14, she's there pretty much the whole time. And again, I try to keep my mouth shut and let her do most of the talking.
And I always had Garrett a part of his, at least for a few minutes, I think I said, and even at the parts that he wasn't there, I had his picture on the table so that we knew as a team we were talking about him, we were making decisions about him. I wanted him to be a center of that discussion. So even if your child is not there present, I would suggest at least having a photo available so that everybody knows who you're talking about.
Okay, question number 3. What if my school resists deferred graduation?
Ooh, Terry?
Ooh, coming to me, huh? Well, Again, we're going to talk about that section 5 of the IEP, which is the transition section, and we're going to look at that information and data, and we're going to make sure that we have good assessments. If you have a very good and rich transition plan, this should not even be a discussion that the team is having, because there should be areas that your child needs to work on. Now, if they've met all of those goals and you feel like they're ready to be independent and employable, then they're probably ready to leave school. But again, as I said, with that good information and data and the assessment materials, you should be able to document the areas that they may need help with till the age of 22. And that can be self-help skills. Again, that can be balancing the checkbook. I can't even balance my own checkbook. I can, you know. So, and you really want to be real about the fact as a parent, the things that your child can't do and that they're going to need help with as they transition to be an adult. It's a big deal. There are days that I don't want to adult. And, you know, so there are areas that can be assessed. And again, it goes back to that transition section of the IEP, and it's a team decision. We need to bring the team together and talk about what's best for that student moving forward and as they become an adult.
Okay, number 4, how do I start the mediation process if I've already reached out to my child's teacher and principal with no results?
Well, let me get out my handy dandy little guide here. I think it's page 16 if I'm not mistaken. Let me check here. 15. To request mediation, right there. See, I don't know if you can see it. Right there, page 16 of this handy dandy little guide. That's how you request a mediation. But I would definitely have a conversation with your child's case manager or the building principal or the special ed director or pupil personnel director, depending on your district, about your concerns and try to address them internally without having to go for mediation. But if you do need to, that is an option, and it's right here in your handy dandy little guide.
Okay, and I believe that's a handout that we have available for people. So we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Number 5, what if my child's teacher does not agree with my assessment of his or her current level of function or abilities, particularly around the amount of work he or she can complete, i.e. being accused of being lazy, and organization?
Okay, Terry, do you have words of wisdom on that? I know I don't know the answer, but I can tell you that that is a struggle that we have had in the past. And for us, it was, again, a collaborative process of data mining and sharing, which is to say, I asked them to collect some data in the classroom. I did some at home. I also reached out to her neuropsychologist to give some feedback, and we went from there.
Personally, I believe that students are not lazy, and if that is a discussion that the team is having, to me that tells me that that student is not motivated, that maybe there's some things that can be put into place, maybe there's a break that needs to happen. I think that all students can and do learn when they're in an environment that supports them, and so I would really look at what are the areas that the child is struggling with, and talk about maybe the pace and the rigor. Is there another option for that student to be able to make progress and be supported and successful in that curriculum? So
an example of that could be in math, instead of doing 6 problems on the same type of issue, she might do 2. She's still practicing the skill, but she's not doing the repetition. That was one of the ways we addressed it. Or we went back to the essential learnings conversation. What part of this homework is essential learnings? As a teacher, I'll tell you, I gave tons of homework, and I wasn't very nice about it. As a parent, my opinion changed, so I apologize to anybody that I had when I was a teacher.
All right, and final question we have. With a 504 plan, do I only receive accommodations and not modifications, or are they unrelated?
That's a good question. Accommodations should be made in the general education curriculum as much as possible. Modifications, there's another conversation. Again, that can go back to that testing piece. It's individualized, teams have to meet. It can be a combination of both.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's a team decision. It's a team conversation that you're going to have. And how does this impact your child's learning?
In that general ed setting with the 504, yes.
This is Diane again. Terry and Pam, thank you for sharing your expertise and experience with us, and thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar, Maximizing Your School Experience. If you have any additional questions, please email me at dburns@sbccincy.org, or you can go back to the addresses that Terry and Pam provided and get them answered by either of them. Included in the handouts are the OED Parent Guide, which Terry has shown to you a couple of times and referenced the pages in there that you can go to. What is spina bifida? An information sheet to take to your child's teacher. The sample modifications and accommodations for students with spina bifida that Pam discussed. A guide for school personnel working with students with spina bifida from Kennedy Krieger, and a PDF of the resources slide that Terry and Pam presented. Also, a reminder that we did an entire webinar on executive function challenges, which also includes tips for success in the classroom back in June. There's a recording of this presentation uploaded to our website at www.sbccincy.org. On behalf of the Spina Bifida Coalition of Cincinnati, our presenters from Lakota Schools and SBCC Board of Directors, and the Hatton Foundation, we thank you for joining us. Now go create your future.